The last effect I want to show you is a compressor. And a compressor is a dynamics effect, which makes the sound a little bit squished. So now, many people, when they hear compression, they think the compression makes the sound louder, but it's actually not the case. It actually makes the sound more quiet. It makes the loud parts of a sound more quiet. And we do that by specifying a threshold of a sound so that we say whatever is above this threshold, scale it down by a ratio. So these are important parameters in a compressor. And let's get our file player and our dry wet mixing. Well, actually we don't need the dry wet, so we just need the file player. And I'm going to get the easy DAGs. And I'm going to use scope tilde to demonstrate the difference between compressed and not compressed. So let's just have two scope tildes. And when we can attach it to one of them here. And then, so what compression does is that we're going to take a signal, maybe like jungly. When we play this signal, let's say maybe play it at 0 decibels, so it's the full sound. So when we play the jungly sample, you will see that the sound will range between 1 and -1. It goes all the way to the peaks. And what you want from a compressor is to make sure to say like, okay, if it goes over a certain level, let's say amplitude value of 0.5, if anything is over 0.5, scale that by a ratio. So if we have a threshold value of 0.5 and we have a ratio saying half that signal, whatever is above the threshold, so the ratio is also 0.5. So when the signal is 1, what we will do is 1 is 0.5 sample values above the threshold we said, right? The threshold is 0.5. When the signal is 1, the difference is 0.5. And that difference, we're going to scale it by the ratio. So we're going to divide it by 2, basically, multiply it by 0.5, which will give us 0.25. And we add that back over the threshold. So a sample value of 1, when we compress it with these values, should become the sample value of 0.75. So I'm going to go ahead and make a very manual compressor, and let's see if this works. So what I'm going to do is I want to figure out when to compress this sound. So I want a signal that tells me, okay, it's time to compress. So I'm going to create something like a gate. Let's just say gate here. And I will bring out the second scope later. So let's make a gate to figure out when the sound is above a certain threshold. So the signal we're going to have is going to range from 1 to -1. So it's both positive and negative, right? So we want the absolute value of that signal. So we just get the positive numbers. And with the positive numbers, I'm going to say everything that is above 0.5, which is our threshold, creates a logical signal 1. So if I create another scope tilde here and connect this guy here and play the sound, you will see that every time this sound signal goes over a certain threshold, our logic gate says, okay, now it's time to compress. Compress it here and here, you know. So now we know which signals to compress, what parts of the signal to compress. Right? So we can make maybe a selector tilde with 2 inputs. And the first input will be our scaled or compressed signal. and the second signal will be our original signal. So I didn't compress the signal yet. We're going to do some maths to compress the signal, but let's just put these guys here. But now I have a way to tell, because this selector will change. If I give it a signal or number 1, it will play the input 1. And if I give it 2, it will play 2. And since we're getting 0 and 1 from the gate, we just add 1 more signal value. So this number will be between 1 and 2. So the selector will shift to the compressed sound when it is 2, and when it is 1, it will play the original sound, the samples below the threshold we determined. So let's say, so this threshold is actually this, and what we want to do is we want to do a little bit of math. We're going to say, okay, it's great that you get an absolute value of everything, and then maybe I can take out my threshold from that signal, 0.5, or we can attach this guy here. So I'm gonna take out my threshold value, and whatever is left as sample value, I'm going to multiply that by the ratio, which is also 0.5, but we connect this guy here. And then I want to add that threshold value back on that signal. So we have our final sample value. Plus tilde 0.5, but this is also the threshold 0.5. And then one more thing we want to do is to make sure that we're doing math on the absolute value of this signal. So we want to make sure that the negative sample values are still registered negative. So if we get the absolute value of it and do the calculation, we will find the right number, but it should be positive or negative. So we can make a little switch that determines the sign of that sample. So we can say sign, and let's just say, for example, if the signal is positive, send me a 1. So if the signal is above 0, give me a 1. If not, give me a 0. And we can, since we only have two numbers, we can scale those numbers 0 and 1 to -1 and 1. So when the number is negative, 0 and 1, so that when the number is negative, the sign, the logic check will give you a 0, and we scale that to -1. And then when the sample value is positive, we just give it 1. And then we multiply that by our new sample value, compressed sample value. And there you go. So now we can put this in our selector input. So now when the signal is above a threshold, selector will switch to 2, and then we will do the math and make sure we are, using a negative or positive sample, and then put that in our selector. And then when we take it out from there, we can put it into our easy DAC. But before we do that, let's just do it first, and then we'll add another parameter. So when we play our jongli, and let's do another scope here, just to make sure that we are comparing the signals. And let me get the compressed signal here. Actually, I want to get the compressed signal here. And you can pause the DSP and check the wavelengths. So now we have compressed the sound. The sounds below the threshold, as you can see here, the sounds below the threshold are basically the same. But the sounds above the threshold, where it's reaching over 0.5, are scaled down. So you have a little more compressed sound. And you can try to hear the difference, but with gentle compression like this, it may not be so clear. But let's give it a try. Let's actually make another selector so we can, bypass the compressed signal and the original signal. And then we can connect it here. And then we can say bypass. So we can choose to hear or not hear the compressed signal. So 1 will be the compressed one, and 2 will be not compressed. Okay, so it may not be that clear, so I'm going to stretch it out a bit and make it a bit more extreme. Let's keep the threshold really low, like 0.1, and let me just make the ratio like 0.25. So then you will see that the signal is starting to get really compressed, right? This is like much more different than the original signal. So let's hear what that sounds like. And the original, compressed. You can take the ratio even further down. So now you're really squishing the signal, right? And the signal is more quiet, obviously, compared to the original. That's because we compressed it, right? So another important parameter in compression settings is the reason why people think compressor makes everything louder. It doesn't actually make everything louder, but I will show you now that if you use something called a makeup gain, so you are increasing the gain of the resulting compressed signal. So when you compress something and then raise its level, what will happen is that the quiet parts will become louder and the loud parts become quieter, and then we take everything up, so everything is kind of louder. So the loudness becomes more steady, even though the signal amplitude could be less. So maybe we can attach our scope to the end of the makeup gain. So if I double this signal that we compressed, it's still not peaking as high as the original signal, but maybe in sound you will hear it's much more noisier. So overall, it's actually kind of louder when you take the gain up a lot. See, the signal is still less than the original signal, but the quiet parts are now much louder. So you get this more of a flat loudness with compression. And mainstream media and radio broadcasts use this to the extreme because they constantly want activities and something happening in their sound signals, so you can always pay attention and listen to the advertisements and so on. Okay. Last thing I want to mention is the limiter. A limiter is also used often in producing music, just to make sure a signal doesn't go over a threshold. And a limiter is basically a compressor with the ratio 0. So when you zero the ratio over a threshold, let's say 0.25, we are limiting all the signals to 0.25. So this is going to distort and change the shape of the sound. But I hope you can hear the difference. Let's put the makeup gain down. And the original. And that's how you limit the volume of a track. So this is a very manual way to do compression, And so now we learned how to compress our own sounds. An easy way to compress sounds is to use the omx.comp object, which will give you a lot of parameters you can play around with. You can check the help file, and you will see that you can send it a lot of different messages to create sophisticated compressors. So go ahead and take a look at this object to make your compression a bit more practical. Otherwise, this is how you do manual compression.